So our next speaker is one who you probably don't really expect to see on stage at a technology event. But if you haven't figured it out by now, Rackspace is different. Some of the main themes that we're going to see running through our presentations and our workshops today, John's already started to mention those: disruption, transformation, and doing things better for customers. But what drives that? What drives that in organisations? What drives an organisation to transform itself and to deliver better customer outcomes? Well, our next speaker believes that curiosity of an individual is a key component of this. He's a corporate anthropologist who for the last 25 years has been working with, advising and studying the top performing organisations in the world, organisations like Coca-Cola, Microsoft, and dare I say it, the New Zealand Rugby Union. In his presentation, Michael will delve deeper into the values of what makes a person curious, how that can translate into an organisational context and lead to better performance. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming corporate anthropologist Michael Henderson.
Okay,
great to have you here.
Good morning, everybody. So I thought I'd better just start off immediately, if you don't mind, just clarifying I'm an anthropologist and not an archaeologist. The reason I need to do that is most people don't know the difference, and there's a critical distinction that's required in an audience participation session that I'm going to run for you today, just so you make that distinction. So if you can just sort of bear with me for a moment, just like to clarify those two. Anthropologists basically wanted to be archaeologists and weren't smart enough. So the first thing I need you to do is if you can just kind of lean across to the person sitting next to you and just get them to lower their expectations for this talk, that would be very helpful. Second thing anthropologists do is we study living cultures. Archaeologists study dead cultures. So what that basically means is anthropologists' job is to put the archaeologists out of business. And increasingly in modern tribes, which we call organizations and companies and corporates, the number of organizations that are sort of traveling through the challenges in the VUCA world that we all operate and live in now are often at risk of actually collapsing and not actually being in a position to be strong enough to survive. So a big part of my role is to be able to go into organizations, have a look at their cultures, see who's winning and who's not, and why. And then ideally be able to codify that and transform it into some useful information that we can share with business people like yourselves to go back and reflect on, are you doing enough within your culture to be able to meet the challenges that the marketplace and just the modern times that we're all living in are constantly throwing at us. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit for you, but before I get started, this is going to be slightly interactive, and I just need to make sure to what extent you as an audience are comfortable with some interactivity. So can I just get an indication of how many of you are comfortable being a little interactive in this session? 5 of you? Great, all right. No, 17. Good. Thank you, that's good. It's often once your first person sticks their hand up, right, everyone else sees it's safe to be participative. So thank you so much, sir, for being the first person to kick off. Really appreciate that. All right, so let's have a look at this whole story. Really what I want to talk about is, as you heard in the introduction, is curiosity and the role it plays inside organizations. It's not something we pay a lot of deliberate attention to at all, but even I'm sure with you arriving here today, you were curious as to how the session's going to go. You're curious as to what some of the amazing speakers you have lined up are going to be working with, and you may be even curious about what are going to be the takeaways, what's going to be the things that you'll be able to grasp and take away with you at the end of today to consider and maybe even apply back in your workplace. And Rackspace has done some really, really cool work at the moment in investigating kind of the underlying depths and role of curiosity. I just think the research they're putting into that is timely, but incredibly important. And so I'd just like to sort of honor them in terms of the time, the effort, and even the dollars they're putting into that sort of conversation and investigation. Now, a lot has been said over the years around curiosity, what it is, where it comes from, why human beings engaged in it. And the interesting thing is that the original word curiosity comes from the Latin, and the original interpretation of that word actually meant to be careful rather than curious. So in other words, that the world was volatile, transforming and disrupted back in those days, and therefore you need to be careful when you go about. So it seems things haven't changed quite as much as we'd like to imagine when we talk about disruption and change in the environment. So the word itself is kind of almost like a mantra for our times if you look at the traditional meaning of it. However, I'd like to suggest that although it was a protection thing, it was almost a case of using that word to prompt people to focus on survival. We've actually had a transition over time, and the word curiosity, if you like, has morphed from being rather focused on being careful to mean rather, what do you actually care for? What are you actually interested in? What makes you curious? And so I have been investigating this for the better part of 40-odd years. This gentleman here had a statue in my hometown of Shrewsbury in the UK. This is Charles Darwin. I used to walk past the feet of Charles Darwin every single day, both going to school and from school. And so, of course, curiosity got the better of me, and I used to ask my parents and grandparents, who is this dude? And they would explain that he was kind of the father figure behind the conversation and the investigation and the exploration of survival of the fittest and the evolutionary process that we have for all species here on the planet. And the reason I mention this guy is he used to talk about, as we know, survival of the fittest. But I think in today's 21st century, it's not about the fittest anymore. You can be as fit as you like, but the speed of the race has increased so much that you can't compete, you can't keep up. In fact, I'd even like to suggest that everything you know, all the knowledge, all the experience you've got, is all you know, and it's no longer enough. So I just want to do a bit of a pop quiz, if that's all right. So maybe a show of hands if you missed yoga this morning. This is a chance to catch up. How many of you believe that the speed, the velocity of business and the requirement you need to move at and your organizations need to move at to survive and operate inside the marketplace have increased during your time of being in the industry rather than decreased? Show of hands. All right, I'm the same, right, and same in my industry. Thank you. How many of you believe that the complexity of doing business and understanding what's going on, gathering all the data, even being informed enough to make the right decisions has increased rather than decreased? Great, yep, same again, okay. How many of you believe that the demands on you personally, so I'm talking about your personal well-being and your health and your sanity, are increasing as well rather than decreasing? So although they told you when you were younger, as you get older and mature, it'll get easier, you'll be smarter, you'll have more money to buy everything you need to look after yourself, the reality is even you are struggling to keep up. And don't see this as a career-limiting moment, right, sticking your hand up in the room. Just curious to know, as a pop service, how many are finding it's tough? Yeah, great, good. So this is what he was talking about, right, survival of the fittest. And what I'm suggesting is I think there's an absolute real opportunity to start to think about survival of the curious. And I'm going to unpack that and explain why that might be the case. So I'm assuming you're all familiar with VUCA, is that true? No? Okay, so VUCA is a US military term that they developed to be able to adjust from the Cold War kind of mentality of huge armies on the planet sort of facing up on one battlefield and fighting. And unfortunately, because of September the 11th, some of the thinking they'd done in preparing for post-Cold War situations eventuated. In other words, what they realized was that the world is now volatile. Is that true? Uncertain? Right? We've already just discussed the complexity of it, and it's also ambiguous. Ambiguous being that what we thought they said and what they're actually doing are two different things. And if you've been following the negotiations with Iran at the moment, right, there's lots of that going on. But I thought you said you were willing to do it. Yes, but only if. Right? So we have these sort of situations going on. Likewise, I'm sure when you're negotiating contracts, is that true? Yeah. What you thought was being offered and what you thought would go across the table suddenly being rejected. So we're living in this VUCA world. Now, traditionally, tribes have done an exceptionally good job at surviving under VUCA and actually coping with it. And that has sort of got even more complex now because the speed of this whole challenge has increased. And so curiosity is actually one of the central elements of being human that enables you to even pay attention to the world changing around you rather than ignoring it, burying your head in the sand. So rather than being afraid of the change and the challenge, if we actually start to get curious about it, it's exactly the same phenomenon happening around us, but how we experience it and play with it changes dramatically. I've even seen this play out. I do a lot of work around looking at sales cultures, and for example, in Australia, 78% of all sales reps in Australia don't want to be a sales rep. And in a VUCA world, who can blame them, right? It's just challenging out there. So we end up with phenomenon in the culture as such things like call reluctance. Have you heard of this? It's where salespeople will do anything, and I mean anything, rather than pick up the phone, jump online, or go and meet with a customer, right? So they'll get busy doing all sorts of other stuff rather than do that. Why? They're afraid of VUCA. And so this becomes problematic. If you've heard of the Pareto theory, the 20-80, right? 20% of your customers are delivering 80% of your revenue. Does that still play out on your markets? Yeah, a lot of nodding of heads, right? And then you go look at the numbers with the sales reps. It's nearly 80% of the sales reps don't want to be doing the job in the first place. I'm not here to say that those numbers are correlated, but that's a curious, there's that word again, connection. And so we start to see that curiosity and how we're actually facing the world, dealing with the world, looking at the world around us, even impacts on revenue streams. And so the more we start to understand about curiosity, its role, and how as leaders and influencers in our businesses, we can champion this word as a process, as an experience, as a phenomenon, where people embody it within the business, the greater opportunity we have for not only surviving, but thriving in transformational times. So, based on what I've said so far, how many of you are kind of curious to unpack this some more and learn a little bit more about it? Can you, again, just have a show of hands if you don't mind indulging me. Great. I'm so relieved there's a number of you because I was going to do it anyway, so it's just good to know that you're on board. All right. So here's how curiosity actually works. And I've got to do this in a very, very short period of time, so I'm going to talk in generalizations. If we had more time, I'll give you more of the science behind it. But fundamentally, this is what happens. On the very surface level of operating in a business, you're thinking. So you're using your neocortex, the rational, logical, sequential process of structuring ideas and concepts into an orderly manner so that you can feel like you're in control and can get the job done. But if you actually pause for a moment and sit and look deeper underneath that, what you'll find is there's a set of values, a set of personal values, not your organizational values, your personal values that you're not even conscious of because you don't have time to reflect on it, that is actually driving and influencing what you think about and what you ignore. It influences what you agree to and what you don't agree to. It influences what you think as being logical or illogical, a good idea or a bad idea, a great relationship or an uncomfortable relationship, an ideal customer or not. So these values are incredibly powerful. And here's the interesting thing, having done over 30,000 personal values inventories in our work, no two are ever the same for any individuals. That means every single person you ever have led or worked with in a team or do business with is guaranteed to have a completely different set of values personally than you have. Which means if you're not curious about finding out what's important to them, you're automatically missing an opportunity to build trust and empathy and creativity into the relationship. We have a saying in anthropology, and it's very simple, but it's incredibly profound if you actually go and reflect on this. And the saying is this: other people are not a failed attempt to be you. And yet if you go and reflect how you spend most of your day, even if you deal with road rage on the road, right, and we pump our fists or point the finger or make rude gestures to other drivers, we're actually taking our personal values and evaluating everyone else around us and everything we're learning through that set and through that filter. So can you imagine how that automatically reduces the ability of you to be truly curious and connect with the world in a more open, exploratory manner? So this becomes profoundly influential in terms of how we run our organizations. I'd even suggest to you, having done the research on this, and I'll talk about this some more later, even the business strategy your organization has run on or is working through, or even designing right now, if you're in strategic planning phase, you will find your strategy is based more on the personal values of the people designing the strategy than on sound business process. Why? Because the limbic brain, where the values are sort of operating from, is 4 times more influential than the neocortex. You can think of it like this. The neocortex is incredibly intelligent, right? It's the most sophisticated kind of known apparatus we've got on the planet. Talk about big data, this thing's phenomenal. But it's just an index finger. It just points the way. It just has flashes of insight. Whereas the limbic brain is the equivalent to your opposable thumb, literally opposable. Yep, that's a good idea, or no, that isn't. So every time we think about a strategy, plan a strategy, right, and we think it sounds smart, the limbic brain will actually vote yes or no, depending on what your personal values are and whether they align with that particular strategy or not. And of course, we want the two things to come together, don't we? We want the neocortex to connect with the limbic brain, because if you look at that, we create pinch. And pinch, or grasping, is profound. Because suddenly, the impossible, through curiosity, becomes possible. I can literally pick that up and move it from here to here without even looking at what I'm doing. For the women in the audience, you're witnessing a male multitasking. I know, phenomenal. So lots of opportunities here to understand the role of curiosity, even from a biological point of view, in terms of how it drives performance and influences who we are and what we're all about. In really simple terms, you can think of your values as being very much like a search word. So if you look at the search window, initially it's blank, which means the whole World Wide Web is open for investigation and exploration. But the moment you type one word in there, let's say it was the All Blacks rugby, right? Because why wouldn't you? And you hit the enter button, suddenly we narrow down our focus to that one particular topic. So our values are incredibly useful. They enable us to filter out what's not that important or of not interest to us and focus on what is. And this is happening subconsciously, even now while I'm talking. Some of you will be even sitting there, even though I'm amazingly good as a speaker, as you can tell, wondering, in fact, what's for morning tea. right? So we get distracted around, so there was a joke around the good speaking, right? So our values literally restrict what we become curious about and what we don't become curious about in any given moment. And we've done a lot of research on this. Now, the slides I'm about to show you, I don't expect you to be able to read them or even understand them. All I'd like you to do is just to make appropriate noises, right, of being impressed. So the first one, I think what we should go with is maybe a collective, ooh. Can we just have a trial run? Yeah, pretty poor. I was expecting for a bit more to it, but here we go. So there's the first set of values that are called control values. There's three key areas that all our human values operate, and therefore all our curiosity operates. Yes, sir, as I said, give up trying to read it. We're going to move on. Is it blurry? Good. I've deliberately wanted it blurry so you can't actually get too distracted by it, because you can get lost in there. Believe me, I've lost a decade of my life investigating these. My wife doesn't know where I was, right? Apparently I was physically there, but mentally I was just gone. So control is one of the things you as an individual and your organization will be curious about. How do we get control, keep control, maintain control, develop control? So even today, when you go and listen to some of the other speakers that are coming, or you go into the other rooms where there's displays on, just make a mental note for yourself when you're investigating and exploring the conversations and understanding what people are saying. Am I doing this out of an interest and a curiosity for control? It's a good thing to know about yourself and tells you where you're at. The second set of human values that play out are these. These are all about relating. Let's have an appropriate noise for this. Let's call this, ah. So I'm just checking you're awake, right? That's all I'm doing. So relating is the second thing human beings get curious about. How do I relate to the world around me? How is my primary relationship going at the moment? What else could I do to support and develop this relationship? How are we relating to the marketplace? How is our brand being perceived? How are we relating to those really important customers we have, and are we doing enough to support them? Right, so the second area you get curious around is how we're relating. And the third and final area is what we call development. So there's another set of human values that are fundamentally about how do I grow, how do I change, how do I adapt. This is what Darwin's talking about. What do we need to shift? How do we cope with the transitions? How do we deal with VUCA? Now, the key to VUCA, obviously, is you don't try and do the whole thing at once. You pick one of them, the V, U, C, or the A, isolate it, because it's the priority at the moment, and just work on that. I've seen organizations try and deal with the whole of VUCA, and they just become VUCA themselves. Right, so you've got to prioritize. And prioritize basically means what's the most important to you? What are the values that you need to respond to at the moment? So those are the three. There's 128 values, for those of you who are trying to count them. I'll just save you the mathematics. There's 128 known human values from cultures all around the world, and they fall into those three categories of control, relate, develop. Every single sale you make to every single customer, your customer's only purchasing from you for one of, or a combination of those three reasons. They want greater control, they want to relate to the world around them more effectively, or they want to develop and change the status quo of where they're sitting in the VUCA world. So very, very simple, but very, very powerful to be informed about that, so you can actually listen to other people at a deeper level and understand where is the fountain of their curiosity coming from? Where is it emitting from? Does that sound of value to you? Three of you? Okay, good. So here's the deal. All the values are what we call either recipients or drivers. Some values are recipients of your curiosity. So you can take any one of those 128 values and get curious about them. Right. One of those values was family and belonging. You might be curious right now. I wonder how the kids are going at school today, because one of them had a bit of a stomach ache this morning. I wonder how she's doing. So you can get curious about any of those values, and we call those the recipient values. You can apply curiosity to them. But there's a unique set of values within that are actually drivers of curiosity. In other words, they demand you to be curious about the things going on around you, the world around you, and the other values. And they're incredibly powerful. So they look like this. There's 11 of them, and the Rackspace research that's being done is investigating this. So I can't wait to see what they come out with and see how this plays out. And don't bother writing them down. These will become available for you. You can have that sort of sent to you. So we'll make that available for you. But fundamentally, there's the three categories of values. As you can see, as we would expect, most of curiosity comes out of the development values, because it literally is looking for change and growth. The second most popular, and there's only two in there, is about relating. So more people are interested in growing and changing and adapting than they are in relating. And then finally, as we would expect, the smallest representation of curiosity from the values in terms of being drivers come from the control, because control actually isn't that interested in curiosity. It's purely interested in survival. And hence we see the transition from survival of the fittest to survival of the curious. It's an evolution of change within human values that have happened over thousands of years to make us more curious now about how to grow and change and develop and self-actualize rather than simply survive like our ancestors were required to do. In terms of technology, of course, this plays out in all sorts of different ways. We can get curious about information and gathering. We have search machines for doing that. We can get curious about what big data is telling us about who we are and where we're going. We can access through technology thought leadership and see what the greatest, newest memes and ideas are that are emerging and see what they mean for us and the impact they're going to have in our industry. We can go and gather data and knowledge and information from sites that would make that available. We can understand net promoter score results and customer analytics, and we can even start to influence our own customers' curiosity, as a lot of online retail outlets do, where they actually put similar products that you've already demonstrated curiosity around and line them up with similar, as happens on a number of music sites and book sites, for example, where they collect the information, notice that you're curious about this particular topic, and then start to put those products in front of you for possible selection. Most of those organizations will share with you that that in itself generates between 20 and 30% additional sales just by tapping into the customer's curiosity. So in summary, what does all this mean? Well, I believe that technology now is to curiosity what fire used to be to survival for our ancient ancestors. So the more you can connect technology, your drive, passion for control, relate, and develop in the world, the more chance you have actually surviving, thriving, and prospering. Have a great day, guys. I hope you enjoy yourselves and work hard. Thank you.